Now let's look at feedback control. The feedback control determines the type of sound feedback which will be produced. There are 4 basic types of sound feedback and various options for them. The most common is the reward sound, which is a wave file heard when all criteria are met. A wave file is typically a ding or a bell or a click, and it's played when all the criteria, for example, low beta above threshold, theta below threshold, and high beta below threshold, when they hold that criterion, all those criteria for a half a second, it will play the reward sound. A second mode is component sounds, which is a separate wave file for each component. So you'd have a different sound for alpha, different sound for beta, etc. This is useful for different types of training, such as crossover training, and needs to have the thresholds adjusted a little differently because it tends to produce sounds whenever any component goes over its threshold, and that produces a lot of sounds. In addition, we have 2 modes which use MIDI. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Device Interface, and it uses the musical instrument capability in your PC. When you choose MIDI sound, we typically get a separate note for each component. So again, with the protocol we're using, we'd have 3 different notes. Each note would play when its component meets its threshold. Typically, MIDI sound is used when you want complex sounds, for example, for alpha theta training. We also have coherence sounds, which is a separate MIDI note again for each component, but the sound is heard when the coherence goes above threshold if you're training up, or below threshold if you're training down. So this provides the coherence sound capability. We then have the coherence threshold, which is set here. Typically you'd be using any range from 10 to about 50 or 60%. If you're using MIDI or coherence sounds, you'll use the voice, and you'll pick a voice. There are 127 voices, including musical instruments, orchestral instruments, and there's a variety of unusual sounds down near the bottom, the high numbers with names like bowed glass, ice, rain, and other sounds, which are actually very useful for biofeedback, and we encourage people to try these different sounds. The MIDI sounds come in 2 styles. One is sustained, which is a note which is held whenever the component meets its criterion, like an organ or a violin. In addition, there are percussive notes, which are like xylophone or piano, which are struck when the component goes above threshold or finds a new high value. Finally, under MIDI modulation, there are 2 choices. One is amplitude, in which the sound gets louder as the component goes above threshold. And the farther it goes above threshold, the louder it gets. And there's also a pitch feedback, which allows the sound to go up in pitch, as if you're playing up or down the keyboard, as the component gets larger or smaller. Since we're using reward sounds, none of these settings are used for us right now, and we recommend starting with something simple like reward sounds. Hit OK. Now we'll look at the session control. Under the session control pop-up, we have a variety of things we can change for this folder. Every session in 2.0 can have a baseline at the beginning and the end of the session. And we recommend a 1-minute baseline. This allows the system to record the values, pick thresholds, and then go into training mode. Incidentally, all of the lengths are in exact minutes. Please don't use 1.5 minutes. It would be 1.0 minutes or 2.0. If you put 0 in baseline, it means there are no baselines. Then we have the run length to choose. That's how long of what's often called a trial we use. We're choosing a 2-minute run, and every 2 minutes there are 2 things that can happen. One is that we can pause, and we see here pause between runs. And the second thing we can do is have the thresholds updated between runs, and we chose that in the auto thresholding pop-up. So in this case we're not pausing, but as you recall we are going to auto update the thresholds between runs. We can also choose the number of sessions. This is an important place to limit the number of sessions to be used, and we recommend no more than 80 as a maximum. 40 or 50 are a typical number, and we'll use 40. If you put 0 in here, it will allow you repeated sessions, but it will always use session 1. So that's a convenient way to create a test folder for test purposes if you don't want to build up a lot of data. And finally, we choose the number of runs or trials. In this case, we're using 10. So 10 2-minute runs means we'll run for 20 minutes of training, plus the 2 baselines, 1 minute before and after, for a total of 22 minutes. And you must have at least 1 run. Finally, we can choose the session type. This is a training session, so we're using this selection. You can also have an assessment session with purposes primarily just for acquiring the data, viewing the data. You can also do a simulation session just for testing. It will play a simulated brainwave through the system. Or you can define a session as a playback. If you want to email it to someone to review it, you just set it as a playback session, and what they will do is review the data later without running training or assessments. Now we're going to demonstrate how to provide folders to your clients, either on floppy disk or on an email, or you can use any related method you like. We see now that we've chosen all the settings and that we're happy with them, so we'll hit use these settings. It'll ask if I want to print it. I will say no in this case. We've already printed it. Then, in order to send it to my client, we simply use folder selections, and ensure that the client is selected. We see here Mill John 1, John Miller. We will press Session Librarian. This gives me then 2 choices. I can either read an archive from a floppy disk, or I can create an archive and save it or email it. So this is the choice we want. I press Create Archive, and it says this procedure will write an archive file for study MILJA 1, study name John Miller. You may then copy the archive to the floppy disk or email it to a recipient. Let's try each of those. We press OK. The archive was quickly created, and it says, do you want to copy to the floppy disk or send it by email? If we want to send it on a floppy disk, we press this choice floppy. First, I'm going to make sure there's a floppy disk in my PC. I then press this button. The copy is now completed. The dialog went past very quickly. And now if I look over, if I move these away, let me close this, and look on the floppy disk, what we see is that MILJOHN 1 BMZ file is on the floppy disk. If we go back to the software and we want to send it by email, what we'll do is press Folder Selections. Again, John Miller is selected. Press Session Librarian, Create Archive as before, press OK, and now we'll choose Email. We now see an emailer has been automatically brought up with a from. This happens to be the computer that has this login. We'll send it from support. There's a subject filled in, BrainMaster file, miljohn1.bmz. The attachment is included. And all we need to do is add johnmiller@aol.com or whatever his address might be, and any instructions we want. John, here is your protocol file. Click on the file to install it. Double click. And we simply hit send. And this message is now being sent to the client so he can use it later.